What's up, friends? In this video, you will learn how to acoustically treat your home studio. Room acoustics have a significant impact on the quality of your recordings and the accuracy of your sound system. First, we'll cover the basics of sound and why it is essential to understand how it behaves in your room. Then we'll discuss different types of acoustic treatment, including absorbers, diffusers, and bass traps. And speaking of acoustic panels, this video is sponsored by Kinetics Noise Control, and they were generous enough to send over 2 of their hard side panels and 2 of their TAD panels, but more on that later. When you are listening to speakers in a room, what you are really hearing is a combination of the direct sound coming straight from the speaker to your ears and the reflected sound which is coming from the speaker, bouncing off all the surfaces in your room and then arriving at your ears. These reflections can color and distort your perception of the sound. They could be masking critical frequency bands which degrade what you are hearing. The room is almost 50% of what you are hearing, so of course it makes sense that you need acoustic treatment if you want to have an accurate listening experience. The most important reflections to treat are known as first reflections. These are the sound waves that reach your ear after bouncing off the first surfaces they encounter in a room. Typically, these are the side walls, back wall, front wall, and your ceiling. First reflections arrive at your ear a couple milliseconds after the direct sound, so they have a significant impact on what you're hearing. To find these first reflection areas, you can use something called the mirror trick. Sit at your mix position and have someone move a mirror against a wall until you can see your speakers in the mirror. Make sure that the mirror is parallel to the wall, and what I like to do is I like to have it flat against the wall and then just slide it around. The area on the wall where you can see your speakers through the mirror is the first reflection zone. Make a note of this area and repeat this process for the remaining boundaries in your room. You'll want to place absorption panels at these locations. I've placed these hard side panels by Kinetics for my left and right side wall first reflection zones. So while we're on the topic of panels, let's dive into that a little bit deeper. I see the use of these pyramid foam panels in a lot of studios, and I hate to break it to you, but they aren't very ideal at all. They only absorb the very high frequencies and don't have much absorption in the mid-range and zero absorption in the bass. Here's a graph showing the absorption properties of 1-inch pyramid foam. On the x-axis is frequency and on the y-axis is absorption coefficient. And as you can see, there's very little absorption in the mids and none in the lows. Even with 2-inch wedge foam, there is no usable absorption below 300 Hz. With 4-inch wedge foam, you finally start to see a little bit of absorption in the low frequencies. However, they just don't compare with proper acoustic panels like this Kinetics hard side panel behind me, which uses fiberglass insulation. The 4-inch hard side panel just blows the 4-inch wedge foam out of the water. It has more than twice the absorption at 120 Hz, which is very critical for controlling low mids and upper bass in your room, which will provide a more balanced and accurate listening experience. Not only that, but I think aesthetically, in my opinion, these panels look a lot better than the cheap foam. This hard side panel is wrapped in a nice acoustically transparent Guilford main fabric, and Kinetics offers a ton of different custom finishes, edge treatments, and sizes so you can integrate it seamlessly into your space. Again, I would recommend panels that are at least 4 inches deep. That way you get usable absorption down to about 100 Hz. If you can, mount the panels with an air gap. This will actually increase the absorption in the low frequencies. Just make sure that the air gap doesn't exceed the thickness of the insulation in the panel. Diffusers are another type of acoustic panel. Diffusers are used to scatter the sound instead of absorb it. When sound hits the surface of the diffuser, it scatters in many directions instead of creating a strong specular reflection. Diffusers can add a sense of space and immersion while simultaneously treating the harsh reflections that would otherwise color your perception of the sound. Diffusers are oftentimes used in combination with absorbers. They can help prevent the room from sounding too dead, which is what we refer to as a room with an extremely low reverberation time in the high frequencies. Too much absorption just sucks the life out of a room and creates an unnatural and uncomfortable listening environment. It also makes the room feel smaller than it is. These 2 panels on my back wall are the Kinetics TAD panels, and TAD stands for Tuned Absorber Diffuser. It has both the properties of an absorber and diffuser. At higher frequencies, it has limited absorption and scatters the sound using the scatter plate on the front. And at lower and mid frequencies, it fully acts as an absorber. I installed these on my rear wall to balance out the sound of my room and keep some of the liveliness. Check out this measurement of the reverberation time before and after installing the TAD panels. I was surprised to see a considerable reduction in the reverb down at like 60 Hz. I honestly didn't think these panels were going to be effective so low. Now there are many different types of diffusers, and I typically wouldn't recommend using diffusers to treat first reflections unless you know what you're doing. If you have a considerable budget for acoustics, then you should definitely consult with an acoustician to know the best way to treat your room. If you have a limited budget, then you're probably better off just sticking to absorption panels. For small bedroom studios, a lot of times diffusers don't really make sense because of the close proximity between the diffuser and your mix position. Peter D'Antonio and Trevor Cox in their book Absorbers and Diffusers recommend being at a distance from the diffuser that is 3 times the wavelength of the lowest frequency the diffuser can scatter. So let's say, for example, the lowest frequency a specific diffuser can scatter is 500 Hz, which has a wavelength of 2 feet. That means your mix position would need to be at least 6 feet away from the diffuser for it to be effective and not cause, say, other problems at your mix position. And that might be hard to achieve in a small room. But if you have a decent sized space, it can be beneficial to have diffusers towards the back of the room and even on the ceiling. Like I mentioned earlier, with something like the TAD panel, you get the best of both worlds. It allows you to retain some of the ambiance and spaciousness of the room, while also treating those lows and mids. Now, I can go on about diffusers forever, so I will cover that in more depth in a separate video. Alright, now for bass, the final frontier. Bass is definitely the trickiest thing to get right, and it requires a lot of space to properly treat low frequencies. Low frequencies have very long wavelengths, so thin panels typically don't do very much. In this video, I'll give you a general guide to bass traps, but I'll cover this in more depth in the upcoming advanced tutorial. Like I said, bass is tricky to get right, so there's just too much to cover in this one video. Low frequencies behave differently than high frequencies in a room. Because the wavelength of low frequencies are comparable to the dimensions of the room itself, the room starts acting like a resonator. You've probably noticed that as you're walking around your room, there are parts of your room that have no bass, and there are parts of your room that have a lot of bass. This is due to these resonances, and we call them room modes. Installing bass traps will reduce the effect of these room modes. Generally speaking, the best place for bass traps are where low frequencies are building up, such as the corners, back wall, and front wall behind your monitors. In the advanced tutorial, I'll show you how you can take acoustic measurements of your room and use that information to know what type of bass traps to get and where to place them. So make sure you're subscribed and you hit that notification bell so you get notified on that video. These cheap traps that I see in a lot of studios unfortunately aren't doing anything in the low frequencies. Remember what I said about that cheap foam stuff? You're really just wasting your money if you think that sort of material can adequately treat low frequencies. High-end mixing and mastering rooms will sometimes have trapping up to a couple feet, so you know it takes some serious treatment to tackle these room modes. In this case as well, build or buy bass traps that use proper insulation and have adequate depth. There are also some bass traps that use a diaphragm on the front to control bass, and there are others that use a perforated hole pattern that acts like a Helmholtz resonator that also controls low frequencies. But those require a little bit more knowledge on acoustics, so I will cover those in the advanced tutorial. The placement of those are a lot more critical than just standard porous absorber bass traps. I would start by placing your traps in the rear corners of the room. That's where bass tends to build up the most. Then try the rear wall and front wall. Once you've covered those locations, you can move on to trapping the rest of the corners and then the side walls and maybe even some traps on the ceiling. And if you mount them with the airspace, you get even more low-end absorption. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found this helpful. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or at my email, djdorosai@gmail.com. I've put links in the description below for all the Kinetics products and their website. Go check them out. They got great acoustic products. I've specified them in dozens and dozens of rooms. And just to be completely transparent, they have no say over the contents of this video, and what I said about their products are my genuine thoughts and opinions. Again, thank you for watching. Stay creative, my friends. Peace.